7 strongest shadow vibrations that activate during your isolation. There's a moment during isolation that hits like lightning, quiet, slow, and yet impossible to ignore. It comes not on the first day, but somewhere in the middle, when the noise of the world has finally died down and all that's left is you. No more notifications, no more distractions, no more pretending. Just you, your breath, and the parts of yourself you've never dared to meet. That's when it begins. That's when the true journey starts. Because isolation isn't just about being alone. It's about being undisturbed. And in that sacred stillness, the strongest shadow vibrations begin to rise, not to haunt you, but to reveal you. When you isolate, you step into a space where the ego can no longer hide behind performance. Your roles dissolve. Your titles mean nothing. Your masks begin to crack. And what emerges is not pretty, not polished, but pure. It's raw. It's ancient. It's you, stripped bare. That's where the first shadow vibration activates, the fear of meaninglessness. Suddenly, without the busyness of life to distract you, you begin to wonder, what am I really here for? And the answers don't come right away. At first, there's only silence. And in that silence, an existential terror can emerge. A voice that says, none of this matters, you don't matter, you're wasting time. But that voice isn't truth, it's a test. It's the death rattle of the false self. Because the truth is, isolation doesn't show you that life is meaningless. It shows you that your meaning must come from within, from truth, not performance, from essence, not approval.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
This leads directly into the second vibration, the hunger for validation. You'll start noticing how much of your identity was built on being seen. The compliments, the likes, the feedback loops. And now, there's no one watching. No one clapping. No one confirming your worth. You feel invisible. And that invisibility stings because you've been trained to believe that if no one is watching, you don't exist. But that's the illusion, because the only witness that ever mattered was you. Isolation forces you to become your own mirror. And at first, that mirror shows you all the ways you've outsourced your value. But if you stay with it, if you sit in the discomfort long enough, you start to see something else. A spark. A center. A presence that doesn't need to be seen to be real. That's when you begin to reclaim your self-worth, not as something given, but as something felt. Then comes the third shadow, the craving for control. Without external noise, you start to feel how chaotic your inner world really is. You want to fix everything, your thoughts, your habits, your emotions. You want to make the discomfort go away, to organize it, to label it, to master it. But the deeper truth is, this shadow isn't about control, it's about fear. Fear of uncertainty. Fear of surrender. Fear of not being enough without structure. And yet the medicine is hidden in the very thing you resist, letting go. In isolation, you learn how to sit with chaos, not to tame it, but to understand it. And in that understanding, you start to see your own patterns. You realize that control was never safety, it was a cage. And now you're free to walk out of it. The fourth shadow is subtle but deadly. The echo of old wounds. These are the childhood memories, the heartbreaks, the betrayals you thought you buried. But in silence they become loud. They speak in feelings before they form words. A sudden nausea, a tightness in your chest, a flood of tears you can't explain. These are not random. These are echoes, energy signatures from unresolved pain that your soul is finally safe enough to process. And yes, it will hurt, deeply, but that pain is sacred, because unlike before, you're finally here for it. You're not running, you're not distracting, you're witnessing. And in that sacred witnessing, healing begins. The fifth shadow is where things get weird. The temptation of self-sabotage. As soon as you start to feel even a little clarity, a little peace, something inside tries to wreck it. A voice says, "This is pointless. Just quit. You'll never change. And if you're not careful, you'll believe it. You'll reach for your phone, open the fridge, reopen a toxic conversation. Why? Because the ego doesn't want peace, it wants familiarity. And if chaos is all it's ever known, it will recreate it even in solitude. So here's the trick. Don't fight the sabotage. Observe it, name it, laugh at it. Say to it, "I see you, but I'm not playing your game today." That's how you reclaim your power, by breaking the cycle with awareness. But the sixth shadow is even deeper. The confrontation with death. Not physical death necessarily, but the death of who you thought you were, the death of your stories, the death of your illusions. In isolation, you might suddenly feel like you're mourning something, but you don't know what. That's because your ego is grieving its own unraveling, and it's okay to let it grieve. You're shedding layers, identities, personas. Every tear is a funeral for a false self you no longer need. And that grief, that sacred grief, it clears the path for something real to be born. And then, finally, we arrive at the seventh and most powerful shadow, the emergence of your true self. Yes, I'm calling this a shadow, because at first it feels like a threat. Your true self doesn't come gently. It comes like a fire. It burns away everything you thought you needed. It makes you question your old dreams, your relationships, your beliefs. It says, "Are you sure this is who you are? Or have you just been surviving?" And if you answer honestly, if you let that fire burn, you will not come out the same person. You will come out real. And that's the point. So I ask you now, not casually, but with the full weight of this journey, if you lost everything you thought made you, who would you become in the silence? Because that question isn't just a riddle. It's a doorway. And isolation might be the only place where you're quiet enough to hear what your soul whispers back. The fire of becoming, how shadow alchemy in isolation unlocks supernatural potential. After the silence has stripped you, after the shadows have whispered their truths and the illusions fall, like ash around your feet, something unexpected begins to happen. In the absence of the noise, in the wreckage of who you once believed you were, you begin to feel something stirring, something ancient, something wild, something alive. This is the fire of becoming. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It flickers at first, like a small flame in the center of your chest, barely noticeable. But if you stay with it, if you choose not to numb, not to run, not to fill the space just because it feels unfamiliar, that flicker becomes a blaze. And that blaze is your true power returning. This is the part of isolation no one warns you about. They talk about healing, about clarity, about peace. But they don't tell you that once your shadows have been faced and felt, what follows is not just healing, it's activation. You begin to access levels of energy, intuition, and creativity that were previously locked behind the walls of your own self-deception. You aren't just recovering, you're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembrance carries power, real power, the kind you don't have to force or fake. It flows through you, almost effortlessly, because it is you. But here's where the fire tests you, because power, in its raw form, is terrifying. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's liberating. And liberation demands responsibility. When you begin to feel your own energy fully, when you realize that your thoughts are shaping your reality, that your intentions are altering the field around you, it breaks your excuses. You can no longer blame the outside world for your inner state. You can no longer play small without feeling the weight of your own self-betrayal. This is the moment where many turn back. It's easier to retreat into distraction than to hold the truth, that you are not just a victim of life, you are a creator of it. In this phase, your senses begin to sharpen. You start to hear the subtle voice of your intuition, not as a whisper you doubt, but as a command you trust. You begin to notice synchronicities, numbers repeating, dreams that guide, people who show up exactly when needed. Time starts to feel less linear and more fluid. You might wake up with solutions to problems you never consciously solved. You might feel the presence of something greater with you, not outside of you, but within you. This is not a hallucination. This is coherence. Your inner and outer worlds are beginning to align. But there's a warning here too. As your spiritual gifts awaken, so does your ego's desire to claim them. It will try to make your power about superiority, about being more awake than others. It will tempt you to teach before you've fully integrated, to post about your awakening rather than embody it. Don't fall for it. The fire of becoming is sacred. It's not for performance. It's for presence. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. And if you protect its purity, it will lead you into territories of consciousness that most never touch. One of the most profound transformations that happens in this phase is the collapse of your old desires. What you thought you wanted, fame, approval, status, even certain relationships, starts to feel hollow. Not wrong, just empty. Because you realize they were built on a version of you that no longer exists. And in that space of loss, a deeper desire begins to emerge, not for things, but for truth, for purpose, for alignment, for sacred impact. You stop asking, what can I get? And start asking, what can I give from my higher state? That shift alone changes everything. You begin to feel a new kind of energy move through you, not emotional, not mental, something other, something intelligent. It feels like a presence, like your future self reaching back through time to pull you forward. You feel guided even when the path isn't clear. You begin to trust that not knowing is part of the alchemy. That confusion is just clarity being born in slow motion. And in that trust you become magnetic. You stop chasing. You start attracting. Not because you're trying to manifest, but because you've become the kind of person who naturally pulls reality into harmony with their essence. This is the power of shadow alchemy. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world convinced you to forget. It's about transmuting your wounds into wisdom, your pain into power, your darkness into depth. And it all begins in isolation, not as punishment, but as initiation into your real self, into your full potential, into a life that isn't based on survival, but sovereignty. So I ask you now, not as theory, but as a challenge to your soul. If nothing outside of you could define your worth, what would you become? Who would you dare to be if no one was watching but you and the divine? Because that's the real test, not what you do when the world is watching, but what you become when it isn't. The sacred breakdown, why losing everything in isolation, is the catalyst for unshakable clarity. When we speak of isolation, most people imagine silence, stillness, perhaps even peace. What they don't expect is the collapse, the unraveling, the sacred breakdown. And yet, this is the most honest part of the journey. When you've been stripped of your distractions, when the masks no longer work, when the identities you clung to turn to dust in your hands, what's left is not emptiness. What's left is truth. But before truth feels like clarity, it feels like death. The death of who you thought you were. The death of what you thought you needed. And it hurts. My God, it hurts. But that pain, that disorientation, it's not the end. It's the beginning. In isolation, there comes a moment where everything you were holding on to begins to fall apart. Your goals, your attachments, your sense of direction. You question the point of everything. You question your relationships, your dreams, even your spiritual path. And that voice inside, the one that used to feel like guidance, goes silent. You feel lost, alone, abandoned, not just by people but by life itself. But this is not punishment. This is purification. Because clarity doesn't come from adding more. It comes from losing what is false. And in that sacred breakdown, the layers begin to peel away, not because you're failing, but because you're finally ready to see what was never real to begin with. This loss is sacred. It's not the kind of loss that breaks you. It's the kind that reveals you. Because when your ego has nothing left to cling to, your soul finally speaks. And at first, it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in stillness, in deep, uncomfortable silence. It speaks in the ache in your chest that says, "There's more to this life than I've been living." It speaks in the tears you cry at 2 a.m. for no reason you can explain. It speaks in the quiet moments when you realize you've been chasing things that never truly mattered. And in that stillness, something new begins to form, not as an idea, but as a knowing, a frequency, a presence. This is what unshakable clarity feels like in its earliest form, not fireworks, not sudden enlightenment. It's a quiet certainty that grows like roots beneath your feet. You stop needing external permission and start living from internal alignment. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin asking, "What is true for me right now?" And slowly, piece by piece, your life starts to rearrange itself, not from force, but from resonance. People leave. Patterns dissolve. Old dreams fade. And in their place, something cleaner, sharper, more you begins to rise. But let me be clear, this clarity doesn't come without cost. You will lose things. You will lose people. You will lose beliefs that once brought comfort. And it will feel like grief, because it is grief. You are mourning the loss of your former self. You are laying to rest a version of you who did the best they could with the tools they had. That version was necessary. That version got you here. But that version cannot take you where you're going. And so you must let them go, with love, with honor, with tears, yes, but also with gratitude. And in that letting go, you begin to embody something rare: sovereignty. Not independence in the shallow sense, but internal authority. You stop outsourcing your power. You stop asking others to save you. You realize no one is coming, and that's not a tragedy. It's a liberation. Because you are not broken, you are becoming. And the only thing standing between you and the next level of your evolution is your willingness to let go of everything that no longer serves your soul. This is the sacred breakdown. It's not chaos. It's not failure. It's a sacred rite of passage, a soul-level detox that clears the path for divine clarity. You are not meant to carry everything. You are not meant to keep everyone. You are not meant to fulfill roles that no longer resonate. You are meant to burn so that you can see what remains when the fire is done. So I ask you, and I ask this from the center of my own breakdowns, what would you have to lose in order to finally see yourself clearly? And are you willing to let it go, even if it breaks your heart first? Because the clarity you seek is not on the other side of effort, it's on the other side of surrender. And until you're willing to lose everything that isn't you, you'll never discover the power of who you truly are. The return, rebuilding a life that honors the power you awakened in the dark. So here you are after the silence, after the fire, after the breakdown. You've shed skin you didn't know you were still wearing. You've watched parts of yourself die that you once believed were permanent. You've sat in the hollow of your becoming, stripped bare of illusion, and from that place something ancient began to rise. Not as a concept, not as an idea, but as you. The real you. The one who had been waiting beneath the noise all along. And now comes the quiet miracle that no one talks about, the return. Because no one stays in isolation forever. Eventually you must re-enter the world, but not as who you were, as who you are now. And that return is its own initiation. The return is delicate. It's not a victory lap. It's a rebirth. You're walking into a world that hasn't changed, but you have. And that's the challenge. Because everything in your outer reality will try to pull you back into your old patterns, old conversations, old dynamics, old expectations, and you'll feel the temptation to shrink, to soften your truth, to downplay the power you've uncovered. But you must resist, not through force, not through arrogance, but through presence, through the quiet, unwavering decision to live in alignment with the self you found in the dark. Because if you don't honor that self now, you never truly met them. Rebuilding your life after awakening is not about going back to normal. It's about creating a new normal one that matches the vibration of your truth. This means taking inventory of everything, your relationships, your work, your habits, your environment. You ask deeper questions now. Does this nourish my soul? Does this reflect who I am becoming? Does this relationship honor my growth, or does it feed my wounds? And you don't just ask, you listen. You take the answers seriously. You let the truth guide your choices, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. Because if your truth only matters when it's easy, then it's not your truth, it's your comfort zone. And you didn't walk through fire to stay comfortable. You'll notice that your standards change. Your tolerance for inauthenticity dissolves. You no longer have the energy to pretend. You no longer make space for connections that drain you. You stop negotiating your worth. But this isn't harshness, it's clarity. And clarity is love. Love for yourself, love for your path, love for the people who are truly aligned with your frequency. Because the more you embody your truth, the more you become a mirror. And not everyone will like what they see. Some will walk away. Let them. Some will try to pull you back. Bless them and keep walking. Because you're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be true to yourself. And slowly you begin to build. Not from ambition. From resonance. You create what feels real. You speak what feels sacred. You move when your soul says move. And things begin to click, not because you're pushing, but because you're aligned. Opportunities start to find you. Connections that match your frequency appear. Your outer world begins to reflect your inner transformation. This is not magic. This is coherence. This is what happens when your energy becomes a clear signal, instead of a confused noise. But even now, even after all you've been through, the work is not over. The shadow still visits. The ego still whispers. The old habits still knock. And that's okay, because the goal was never to become perfect. The goal was to become aware. And now you are. You see the patterns before they take root. You feel the energy before it becomes behavior. You have become the guardian of your own frequency. And that is power. That is mastery. So before we end, I want to ask you one final question. The kind that echoes in your chest when the world goes quiet. Now that you've remembered who you are, will you have the courage to stay that person even when everything around you tries to make you forget again? Because that's the real return. Not just coming back to the world, but coming back different and choosing to stay different. Choosing to live as the soul you found in the dark every single day. Not perfectly, but truly. And if you can do that, if you can walk back into the world with your heart still open, your boundaries still strong, your truth still intact, then you haven't just survived your isolation. You've transcended it. You've turned it into initiation, into transformation, into a foundation for a life that is not just lived but embodied. Welcome back. This time as you.